The first house begins the horoscope and is the house of beginnings, where ventures are begun, businesses, marriages, projects. They all have beginnings. It is here that we find things that are primary, the first time, in the first place, primary colors, prime ministers. The first house is the area in the horoscope to find causes, especially primary causes. It is where originality and origins flourish, the original model of something, a plan of a building or an automobile, an archetype, an original mental image of a man, the Atman, the personal soul, and also the universal soul. This is the house of the soul, and its purpose in this life. It is also the house of its physical body, a man's, not an animal's physical body, its constitution, and the first 30 years of its life. It is the house of constantly recurring symbols in a process or action or project. The human form is a constantly recurring image of the Atman. It is a hologram of the original. The first house emphasizes and repeats its theme. In a group of marching men, we hear it repeated again and again: left, 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 right, left, or the patriotic song that urges even exhausted men to carry on. It is the first house that gives things their epic proportions, and even their patriotic and mythical themes. It gives us epic poems like Paradise Lost, the Beowulf, the Divine Comedy, and Sohrab and Rustum. This is the house of principles, and the house of Old Testament teachings concerning Genesis and the origin of man and the cosmos. The first house is related to our own genetic code, the basis of biology, and any human field that goes way back, like archaeology, history, Darwinism, anthropogenesis, and embryology. This is the house where the identity is first established, the verb to be. I am, thou art, he is. It is where the name is given, the first name being your own name. The family name is shared with others. Most significantly, this is where your own attitudes begin to become the start of your character building, where your mind develops through the cerebral hemispheres, and the emerging will begins to control the central nervous system within your growing awareness. The first house rules the state and the nation, that which is the most powerful factor of your temporal or secular life. It is the house of the capital city and the political life of the state carried out there. This is the home of the Capitol building of the American state, and where, in state buildings and ministries, generals, presidents, senators, and governors may meet. Unity and the number 1 come under the first house, and it is where the influence of the first ray of will and power is most felt, and focus and concentration are its agents. In spiritual terms, this is the house of the head centers, and dharana, or sustained concentration, and the element of fire links them. It is the house of leadership, and where the psychopomp emerges to lead you in your subjective life into the 12th house and its collective unconscious. It is where important words are stated, where they are quoted and placed between inverted commas. The first house rules documentation, commercial documentation, like invoices, and especially statements. It is where strong superlatives are flung about. Cassius Clay's "I am the greatest" and Hollywood's superlative make spectacular viewing. In mythology, this is the place of rams, sheep, snakes, and helmets. Mercury, the lord of the first house and ruler of Aries, is operational here with dexterity and quiet efficiency. It is where messengers and couriers, ambassadors, and the news arrive. Finally, the first house is the house of stroke, the cause of so many deaths. It is the house of brain tumors, mental disorders, concussion, and of course, genius. The second house is the house of money, your own money. It is the house of personal resources, the possessions that you have, and your attachments to them. The verb for this house of possession is "I have." It relates to possessive pronouns, mine, yours, ours. The second house is where there is getting and gaining, and where resources and reserves are located. We therefore find here prices and costs, things that have value, and things that are expensive or cheap. It is the house of treasure and bullion, and where provisions are stored, or where things are given away or donated. The second is the house of insurance and guarantees, the house of stability and solidity, and things that are fixed. It is where there is security, the house which is guarded, and the hacienda, and where things are sure and firm and certain. It is where we find supports and foundations, bases, and what is basic. It is the house of floors and the carpets and rugs, of course, that are on the concrete or wooden floor. This is the house of uncultivated land, where there are holes in the ground and pits and hollows. Also anything that stems from within the soil, like carrots and beetroot, and the roots of trees and tree trunks themselves. It is where we find apples which fall on the ground or hang in the trees. This is the house of wood, of wooden furniture and boxes, and sticks, rods and golf clubs. It is where there may be resentment, and the stick is the symbol of resentment. The second is the house of energy, fuel and petrol, and also that of personal energy, the energy that you require for your own needs. But it is also the house of constrictions, where strictures can occur, strictures like gripping and squeezing and choking and tying and binding. It is the house of rope and cables, and wire, and strings and threads. It is where there is also, through Vulcan retrograde, a freeing or emancipating, a liberating, releasing or loosening, especially where a narrowing or neck occurs, for example, in the human neck and necktie. It is the house of narrow tubes and pipes. In the home, it is where passageways and corridors are located. Outside, it is the house of channels and tunnels, and in the countryside, valleys and ravines. It is the house of the English or New England countryside, the house of John Bull, and bulls, cows, and bovines in general. But the nation most related to it is, of course, Spain, with its nasty bullfighting. Black and red are its colors. It is the house where there is pushing and pulling, and where people are stocky and muscular. This is the house of plastic and plasticine, and where we find earthenware and terracotta pots and jars. It is also the house of bricks and stones, stone statues and carving, the house of rock and of the powdered earth or dust. And finally, it is the house of the forge, where arms were once fashioned. The third house is concerned with relationships in general. Not the close relationship of a child with its mother and father, but rather with brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, and even cousins, and relationships with immediate neighbors who live in the same street. The third house is also where twins are located, and the phenomena associated with them. It is the home of the second ray of love wisdom, the great ray of teaching and healing, the twin qualities expressing service to mankind and sacrifice. It is the house of the school, the teacher, and the pupils who learn to read and write there. It is the house of language, and the English lesson with its grammar and spelling, its essays, short stories, and indeed communication by language, especially through printing. The third house is concerned with short journeys, like commuting to the workplace, or going to and fro from school. This is the house of short runs in sports, like cricket, tennis, and baseball, and in athletics and track events, jogging, and calisthenics. Anatomically, this is the house of the eyes and how they deal with seeing and observing. It is also where activities involving the hands are found, like handicrafts, hobbies, needlework, and manicuring. The third house is where things are divided in two, and where there is divisiveness, where discord, disagreements, and arguments occur, and where there is a splitting up or separation. but it is also where two meet in a tete-a-tete, and where there is fair play and chivalry in handling the fairer sex. This is the house of the window and window frames, remembering that the eyes are the windows of the soul. It is the home of picture frames and of hallways where letters are kept and sports gear is assembled. Venus is the lord of the third house and brings refinement. It rules new things, innovations, and what is early and fresh, the young-looking, and things that are scintillating and numinostic, glossy and shiny. The third house is where things are clear, bright, and luminous, for Venus rules light and illumination. Through Venus, this is the house of high quality, loveliness, pleasantness, enjoyment, gladness, politeness, and courtesy. It is where harmony, rapport, ethics, goodness, truth, reason, and calmness may be expressed. Finally, the third house is the house of things that are short, small, or petite, and where we find the ray to physical body. The fourth house is the home, and where the family lives. It is concerned with domesticity and matters that are very private, only to be discussed amongst the family members, no outsiders. This is the house of the mother and her very young children. It is the house of the baby, its suckling at the breast and its nourishment. It needs great care and nurture. Others who need care in this house are the elderly. It is the house of geriatrics and the infirmities that develop in old people, like Alzheimer's disease. This is the place of fragility, frailty, and fatigue. Things break or wear out here, become faded or faint in the fourth. Grandparents become dependent, and houses themselves become dilapidated. It is where things, people, and places wear out and come to their end, cease, finish, where matters are brought to a conclusion. This is where ancestors are still revered, though extinct, and where we find the Chinese who more than any revere their ancestors and the ancestral home. The fourth house is where the activities of the day are stilled and night rules. Beds are prepared for sleep and dreams, and this heralds hypnagogia and hypnopompia to take you into the never-never land. It is thus the house of vagueness, mistiness, and smoky greyness, where consciousness is fogged and illusion abounds, where delirium, muddle, nonsense, and confusion surge into consciousness, and where concussion and petty mal take it away. It is where there is foolishness and forgetfulness. Things are lost. Where people at fault make mistakes, and there are errors of judgment, lies, and evasion. The fourth is the house of vacuums, breaks and continuity, gaps, voids, and omissions, pauses, rests, and extreme negativity. This is where there are failures, collapse, and anything sinking, going down, dropping, falling, and sagging. Out of such failures come things that are spoilt, wasted, and useless, things that go rotten or putrid and have to be dumped and discarded as garbage. This is the house of shallow waters, where clawing sea creatures dwell. It is the home of the crab, which loves the wetness and moisture, and evades you by moving sideways. But the fourth is also where the imagination is exercised in a variety of ways to give us poetry and music, especially as it was classically in ancient Greece. The fine arts and color are expressed here to enhance the imagination, especially when Neptune, lord of the fourth house, is retrograde and at its spiritual best. There are two games suited to the aged and the domestic life. The first is Mahjong, a game of ancient Chinese origin, still played, but alas, only in the Orient. Secondly, there is the card game of crib, often played in old inns and by old men. The name crib is also reminiscent of the fourth house, through its other meaning of a baby's bed. Neptune is also lord of the ocean, and raises gales and storms at sea and even on land. We must not forget his trident, with its 3 prongs, for the number 3 and its triplicities are a feature of this house. The fifth house is naturally occupied by the fixed sign of Leo. Houses with fixed signs in them don't carry much variety of expression. What is expressed is fixed indeed, and only the most stubborn action produces change. The fifth house is anchored to the metal gold, which the ancients found the most durable of elements against all weathers. Not gold bullion so much as workable gold, turned into golden crowns, rings, jewelry, and coronets. It is where hats are worn for all occasions, especially hats that flatter the ego, whose bright feathers or fruit catch the sun. This is the house of royalty that wears the crown, and whose palace is adorned with gold leaf, and the tableware gold-plated. It is the nobility of this house who aspire to titles and enthronement of some kind, the lords and ladies of the land, or whoever are the ruling class. This is the house of the showcase, where things are put behind glass to give them glitter, where the stars come out, not just those in the heavens, but the stars of Hollywood, Broadway, and the theatre land of Disney World, and even the Moulin Rouge. This royal house is lavish and grandiloquent. It is where favors are bestowed and favoritism abounds, highlighting the royal favorites and courtesans of yesteryear, like Madame Pompadour and Madame du Barry, as well as the male of the species. Paralleling these are today's mistresses, the illicit partner, lover, giving sexual favors. In younger people, it is the lovesick swain, my dearest, darling, sugar stick, sweetie pie, and so on. It is where affairs of the heart are nurtured, and the time when adolescents seek out their boyfriends and girlfriends and play fun and games. The fifth is the house of celebrations, gay festivals, parties, and leisure time in the sun, where lazy layabouts and beach bums holiday, where bright-covered magazines tell of islands in the sun, where you might take your sons and daughters on holiday. It is the house of flowers and sugar, and honey, and of restorative energies, and also that of the health farms. It is where the prana of sunlight feeds the vital body, and chakras whirl, and nadis flash, and health radiates. It is where the sun shines, and the face beams, and even the clock face looks happy. The fifth is the house of rescue and recovery, where help is given and vitality restored, and where seats are lazed in. It is where bright clothes are hung out to dry, and where criminals in nooses are hanged for their misdeeds. It is the house of the heart and heart diseases that cause more than half of human deaths by infarct and coronary thrombosis. Finally, the fifth house is the house of the pet, but especially the cat in all her moods. It is the house of Leo the lion, the largest and laziest of the cats. Cats expect you to serve them at all times, and always to allow them to laze their livelong days away. Hours of daylight, cycles of summer sunlight, annular rings on trees, Anno Domini, circles and centers, wheels and hubs and their rotation, cells and nuclei, they're all part of the fifth house. In the sixth house, we locate unmarried people, bachelors, bachelor girls, maidens, virgins, and spinsters. Unmarried mothers qualify for inclusion here. The single parent and her child, boy or girl, form a special and sizable social group and must be identified amongst the unmarried. Couples who are engaged to marry also fit in here because most have intercourse premaritally. Celibacy, where it is practiced, is also part of the sixth house, as is the very rare matter of chastity, often associated with messianic qualities. This is the house of whiteness, the whiteness of purity and the driven snow. It offers purification, sanitation, and hygiene, for this is the house of the bathroom, cleanliness, and the laundry. This is the house of nursing, and where things are kept clean, neat, and tidy. Nursing calls for extremely hard work, and you will find it here. This is also the hard work of waiting at table in restaurants, or as servants in a large household, or as a gardener. Farm hands, laborers, piece workers, and any who work hard physically are placed here. It is here that services are rendered for payment by wages, salary, or on account, and those to mankind are also assessed. This is the house of the profile, stark in black and white, and of duplicators. It is where objects on the horizon are so distant as to appear black and silhouetted. The fine, delicate work of filigree, the heaven-pointing fronds of trees, the tall spires and the antlers of deer mark this house. This is the house of France, the Orlean maid and the legend of Joan of Arc. And here you find Arab countries like the Levant and those of the Fertile Crescent, countries like Syria and Iraq, and in North Africa, Morocco and Algeria, Tunis and Libya. Through the moon, lord of the sixth house, the crescent of Islam rules. Above all, this is the house of sickness, and the therapists who deal with it, the doctors who diagnose it, and the nurses and radiotherapists who give the treatment. Here you will find the desperately ill, the disabled and malingerers, the hypochondriacs who believe they have every illness, and those who refuse treatment, like the Christian Scientists. This is where you find the pharmacists, their laboratories, and their white uniformed assistants, chemical experiments, questions, examinations, measurements and assessments, calculated guesses, formulae, facts and figures, and analyses. The sixth house expresses powerfully the ray of concrete knowledge and analytical science. It concerns information and research and produces the best accountants, bookkeepers, and auditors. This is the house of the New Testament, the house of Joseph and Mary and their son, and of course the Protestant religions. The sixth is a modest house, where there is decorum, and seemly things are done, and done with Puritan thoroughness. Again, finally, through the lunar lord of this house, responses and reflections, spoons especially in shiny silver, dishes, plates, and the 29-day period of the lunar month are all part of the sixth house.